Well, thank you all. I must confess, I feel like an odd person out. I didn't come with a PowerPoint presentation, so bear with me. I did come with some film to watch. I guess what I'm going to talk about, as the introduction, thank you, said, and I want to thank also the organizers for this very interesting conference. It's a very different sort of forum than I'm used to. But that, I started off in journalism. I'm now in documentary film, which in my world is a distinction with a difference. And I'm going to focus a little more on sort of documentary filmmaking. Maybe in the discussion we could also talk about journalism, because I think one of the interesting things that emerged from the morning discussions is I think there's a gulf a little bit between the journalistic practitioners and the sense of can we be doing things differently, and the people studying the sort of where we are now. But I want to say that as a filmmaker, if you're talking and not showing, you're already in trouble. So I want to start a little bit with a clip. This is a trailer. I apologize, a trailer by definition is sort of an advertisement for a film we just finished. But I think that because of that, the decisions you make about what to put in the trailer says a lot about what you as a filmmaker want the public to take away about what this film's about. So we're going to watch this trailer, and I'm going to sort of try to break it down on the other side. So thank you.
Mother Nature gave us something that's richer than our imagination.
We saw a very peculiar pattern.
Never seen anything like this before.
I remember him saying, remember this word, CRISPR.
You can actually use CRISPR to change DNA.
David's doctor told me, just hold on, there's something coming.
We've never had the ability to change the fundamental chemical nature of who we are, and now we do. And what do we do with that?
Our pig is the most advanced genome-modified animal running on the Earth.
My lab has been accused of taking science fiction and turning it into science fact. I consider that very high praise.
We could engineer a single gene that could potentially make us all more muscular. But should we make that universally available?
Many people find what we're doing to be disturbing, or they're not ready for it.
Что человек может создавать человека, человек, который может воевать без страха и без боли. И вот то, о чем я сейчас сказал, может быть страшнее ядерной бомбы.
Should we really be manipulating the heredity of future generations given our lack of knowledge about so many things?
I don't know where you draw the line between not having albinism and deciding your kid needs to be an extra foot taller so they can be a good oarsman and go to Yale. Where is that line? Who's going to draw that?
Anything that will stop my child from suffering, I'm for.
Draw this ethical line wherever you want, but don't draw it in front of my disease.
Humans are very good at inventing things, but they're very, very bad at working out what the implications are.
The balance of nature is built of a series of interrelationships between living things and between living things and their environment.
Often you don't realize that you're in the middle of a revolution until after the revolution has occurred.
So this is our film, Human Nature. It's premiered just recently for the first time at the South by Southwest Film Festival, and more recently our international premiere in Copenhagen. We're starting to play other festivals and are starting to work on our distribution. And this is the first initiative of something that Monica referred to called the Wonder Collaborative, which has grown out of this existing nonprofit of iBiology. This is our attempt of innovating and revolutionizing and hopefully reinventing science filmmaking for the general public. And we really did treat this film from the very beginning as an experiment in science storytelling. So I want to sort of break it down a little bit. One thing we learned as storytellers early on, and for good reason, is that stories work best when there's a chief protagonist, a hero often on a journey. Many stories of science are told that way. So maybe just looking at that trailer, who do you think the chief protagonist is for this story? I mean, it's actually obviously a trick question. There is none. And that was a decision we made very early on, because when we dug into CRISPR, we realized that CRISPR like many scientific discoveries, are really about many, many voices coming together, streams of research coming together, people playing different parts, and that to try to focus on any one person would be to actually distort the narrative of what really happens, and by so doing, really distort the narrative of science. And when we actually got out into the social implications which we deal with, if we had focused only on one of those stories, that would also have been a disservice to all the diversity in which this new technology will inflict change, for better or worse, on the global community. Okay, another thing we hear a lot about, and we've heard today, scientists are boring. They are stiff, they are full of jargon, and the way that science storytellers often in film deal with this are to introduce a translator. That translator can take many forms. It's often a narrator, a narration, disembodied. You don't ever see the person. And the idea often is, okay, we let the scientist speak a little bit, and then the narrator says, well, that's what they say, but let me focus you on what's important. Let me shape it. So ultimately, there is somebody, a voice of a person you never see in between the scientific community and the audience. Or you can have an on-camera host, somebody who uses humor or their own celebrity to, again, be a bridge between the scientific community and the general public. Well, we were very, very lucky for this film. We had a wonderful group of on-camera hosts, and they were the scientists themselves. We worked very closely with them from the beginning and other stakeholders in this discussion through the interviews, through the editing process, to say, we want you to tell the story for yourself. There's not one line of narration in this entire film. There's no celebrity holding a mic or doing a bit or anything like that. It was very important for us to say, look, the scientific community and people that study the ethics of this and patients from diverse backgrounds, that your story matters. This is your story, and you should be able to tell it directly to the public, and there should be a direct engagement between the public and the people telling the story. And it shouldn't just be us as the storytellers, as an intermediary. One other thing we've also, I think, heard today is science itself. The details, sort of boring, sort of hard to deal with. People aren't interested. I would argue, have we really tested that? And this is sort of a bigger discussion I want to say. Might one of the problems be not in what people think, but in sort of how they're being told, in what the storytelling actually is? Is the fault actually within us, the storytellers, for our own lack of imagination, for our own lack of creativity, for our own lack of ability to take complex subjects and convey it with a certain level of sophistication in a way that the public can understand? Obviously, you can go too far, but what our approach was from this, and we had wonderful support with our funders and the community in which this was made, was that we were going to try to blow past every single line of what people thought a science documentary could be for the general public and say, we're just going to test this. Like, we're just going to go all there and see how people really respond. We went, and some of the first questions we got when we showed at South by Southwest is people said, well, thank you so much for dumbing it down for us. Like, I never really understood science, and was like, wow. I mean, we have one of our chief characters quote a haiku about homology-directed repair and state that jargon in it, but it makes sense in the context of the film. Now, why am I saying all this? Do I want you all to go to our website, humannaturefilm.com, and check out and find out? But of course, am I very proud of this film? Of course, but I'm more proud of the spirit in which it was created. I think we need to treat science filmmaking, science storytelling, more like the scientific community itself. I would argue that the spectrum of science filmmaking, science video storytelling, but also in other forms, occupies a really narrow band of the spectrum of the possible. And that we are, in essence, running the same experiment over and over again. We are limiting ourselves to what we think the public can deal with, what the scientists can say, and science itself takes risks. Science, the big advances are ones that have challenged our own conventional wisdoms, challenged our own biases, blown past those, and not been afraid to fail. And I would argue that everybody in this room, no matter what your background is, whether you're studying science communication, whether you're communicating science, whether you're telling stories, whether you're funding it, whether you're a scientist itself, that we all need to try to come together in the spirit of collaboration and experimentation to try new things and to really see what works and what doesn't work. I think that the number of scientists that have a story to tell is much bigger than the number of scientists that could give a good TED Talk or that will appear with Stephen Colbert or even write an op-ed in the New York Times. That the goal should be that we figure out a way to tell all of their stories in all of its diversity. And that should be the charge of the storytellers and all the people So the idea of the Wonder Collaborative is that if we can bring these different pieces together and we say, listen, let's just try new things. Let's test these things before we just assume that they are accurate. And I want to leave you with one final sort of summation that came from a scientist, which I think sums up so much of what we're trying to do. He said, you know, when I am told to communicate to the general public, what I'm told is to imagine what the public will find interesting. He says, I never get to talk about what I find interesting. And I think that is a failure on our part, that is the message that's gone out, that what is most interesting is what the scientific community thinks is interesting. And if we're not communicating that, if we're not showing that the process of discovery, the wonder and awe of pushing back the frontiers of the known, then I think we're all just sort of playing in the same kiddie pool and not really trying to go out into the ocean. So that's sort of what we're trying to do. So thank you.